So obviously Bridgerton has been a huge phenomenon even before this season, and people have been looking forward to it. When you found out that you were going to work on a series like this, that emotion and that feeling, do you remember that? Or was it just a
Yeah.
completely
Oh
fictional
gosh.
story?
I remember it so clearly. I remember the phone call. I was already in the Shondaland world and they knew my
Right.
work. And the two of them just called me and was basically like, hey, you want to pop on over to London and maybe shoot some Bridgerton? I'm like, are you kidding?
Well, good to have you. Thank you for your work on the Bridgerton.
Thank you.
So just so that we have for the audience listening, which episodes did you work on in season three, part one, part
Yeah.
two?
Yeah, I shot 1 and 2 and 5 and 6.
Combines the parts, right? Part one and two, the one that came
Yeah,
out
so
today.
the first 2 episodes of part 1 and the first 2 episodes of part 2 are my
Mhm.
episodes.
Awesome. That's good.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, I just want to tell you that the look and the feel of the colors are uh, quite different from what has been coming out over the last while, in cinema and on TV series. Everything is sort of darker tones and blacks and shadows.
Yeah.
So it was refreshing to see super bright colors, which was very appealing. And to start off with that, was that the most difficult? That's not the right question. Was it the most different project you had done in terms of aesthetics and production design and all that? And how was that different from other stuff that you had done?
Yeah, it was definitely different than anything I've ever done before. Because also going into it being a period piece, usually you're expecting to kind of light it and you're looking for a certain look. A lot of times period pieces are very diffused, sometimes even on the muted color palette
Mm,
to give a sense of age. But this is not like that at all. They want the colors to pop. You want to see all that vibrant um, color palette that's coming out of production design and costumes. So it's actually a very different looking period piece anyway. Um, and stuff that I've shot in the past have been like Grey's Anatomy, and then I did a show called Keep Breathing, which took place in Vancouver Forest. And so I've kind of been all over the map in terms of a visual look for my projects, but this was definitely very different. And just the scale of it all too, just needing to get those really amazing, beautiful wide shots that show off everything. Like that's very complicated to do and to light for that. And so that was like one of the biggest challenges is just to really show off the space. Um, yeah, but it was so much fun working on that show.
I'm sure, and I'm glad you mentioned the wider shots. That's something I talk about on this podcast quite occasionally. That how maybe I'm old school, but I do not enjoy anything where everything is super tight. I
Yeah,
like the environment to speak to me, and I understand everybody has a different vision. It doesn't make it right or wrong. It's just my preference.
yeah.
And it's so good to see that because even if you're paying attention to a character, the dialogue or a costume, then your eye might just catch something else if you're watching it a second time or
Mhm.
a third time. And it's
Yeah.
cool. It's really
Mhm.
cool because it speaks to the story, right? And it
Yeah.
people don't realize that, but it does definitely speak to the story.
Oh, yeah. And Bridgerton is very big on making sure that we're not doing close-ups like this
Yeah.
often. So we will sometimes go into a close-up if it's absolutely necessary to tell that story between characters. But for the most part, we're about waist high. And then
Hmm.
depending on the hair as well, we might give a ton of headroom because it really is about showing off the costumes. So that was actually a breath of fresh air for me too, coming out of network TV. Network TV has a tendency to always want to do these really tight close-ups, just for editorial sake, people watching on their phones, all that kind of stuff. But with Bridgerton, we wanted to hold wider frames to show off the space and the costumes.
Yeah. Um, so in terms of the space and the performances. and the type of project that you were working on, what was the most challenging, the type of shots that you were working, what was the most challenging part of a day or multiple days that you hadn't
Mhm.
encountered before, perhaps?
Yeah. I mean, really, the coordination of the ballroom scenes was a massive undertaking on the prep side. I'd never really done anything of that scale before, where you have a cast of 15 to 25 people that all have speaking parts at different times, and the scene is written as almost just one whole scene sometimes. So you'll get a ballroom scene that's like 25 pages. So then the director and I would go in and we'd part out these massive scenes to figure out, okay, this grouping happens at this section of the ball, this grouping happens at this section, and then just trying to figure out how to connect those different groupings of people, and then the coordination of that. So then after we decide, okay, these are the groupings and this is where people are located and this is how we'll part it, then we have to go to the AD staff and make sure that falls in line with scheduling
Yeah.
because they don't want to have all of their main cast there all day long every day for a whole ballroom scene. That's just a lot to ask of the actors, because then you're also asking like lead characters just to hang out in the background as background people. So that's part of the coordination too, is just, okay, are we going to see the queen in these shots? And that's always a question. Are we going to see the queen? Because her outfits and wigs are really difficult to take on and off. And so we have to coordinate the day around that. Like, okay, at this time, and I'll let the ADs know to like 3 shots ahead. Like, okay, I think 3 shots from now we'll have this wide shot, and yes, I will see the queen in her balcony. So it's like that massive undertaking of the coordination for the ballroom scenes was something I had never encountered before, but it was really challenging and fun. Like I'm kind of an organization freak anyway, so
Hmm.
coming up with plans with the director and the AD and figuring out how to solve these problems to make it all work together is part of one of the main reasons why I really love the job of being a director of photography. So I actually found it really fun.
Yeah, challenges are always good. Maybe not at the time when you're going through them 100%, but it grows you as an individual and as a cinematographer or director or whatever that your skill set is.
Absolutely.
Yeah. One thing, I mean, we talked about wide shots, but just to kind of give you an example, just a little comment. It was really cool to see not just, waist up, but even there'll be a scene where you'll have two characters sort of waist up, and in the background you have all these extras, but there are other characters who are maybe, looking at them, or, there's gossip going on. But the
Mhm.
great thing, th those kind of scenes are very, very special for me, those shots, because again, it goes back to what I was saying. There was not shallow depth of field, so I'm assuming you were shooting on like a, rather wider lens, like 28 or 35 or
Mhm.
whatnot. And it just
Mhm.
spoke too much. Again, it just adds the intensity. So it was just a comment. Those kind of things I enjoyed more from a visual standpoint because it just said so much.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of that is scripted because we need people to be looking at so and so who's looking back at so and so. And a lot of that is actually written in the script. And so those looks, so if we're holding a wider shot and you see a group of people looking at them, a lot of times that is actually scripted. Because Bridgerton's all about who's looking at who and who's
Yeah. But
seeing that
but
that person is looking at them.
Yeah, but the easy way out would be let's cut away, right? Like let's do different
Yes.
coverage and stuff. Again, that doesn't do the
Yeah.
justice, right? It just does not.
Right. No, you're absolutely right. So all that is planned. Like, let's make sure that that group of people can see that this is happening in the foreground. And then, yeah, lens consideration is always a factor. Not always shoot. I mean, I don't really shoot wide open either. I'm not really a 1.5 shooter, at least on this show.
Right.
Um, Usually working between a 2 and a 2.8. Still, it's full frame. So that's going to have a lot of fall off on a longer lens. But playing into some of those wider angles, like a 24, 25, um, then yeah, you're going to get a little bit more of that depth of field.
You didn't work on the first and second season, right?
No.
Okay. So obviously Bridgerton was a huge has been a huge phenomenon even before this season, and people have been looking forward to it. So
Yeah.
when you found out that you were going to work on a series like this, can you tell me the story of how that happened and how your own, we are all kids at hearts and we're always looking for different projects. So
Mhm.
just that emotion and that feeling. Do you remember that, or was it just
Yeah.
a completely
Oh
fictional
gosh.
story?
I remember it so clearly. I remember the phone call. Well, I had already been involved with Shondaland prior, working on Grey's Anatomy and also a show called For the People. So I was already in the Shondaland world and they knew my
Right.
work. And so what happened was Jeff Jurr, who's been the DP on since season one, he was still shooting Queen Charlotte when Bridgerton season 3 needed to start. So they knew they needed a new DP to come in and do 2 blocks. And it was actually a call from Sarah Fisher and Tom Verica, who are Tom Verica, is the producing director of the show, and Sarah Fisher is an executive producer over at Shondaland. And the two of them just called me and was basically like, "Hey, you want to pop on over to London and maybe shoot some Bridgerton?" Like honestly, Tom said it that way too. He was like, "Yeah, think you'd be interested in maybe shooting some Bridgerton episodes?" Like, because he knew, he knows me. I'm like, "Are you kidding?" Like my reaction, because I knew he was playing a joke on, like, of course my reaction's going to be over the moon about it. So he was like, "Oh, okay, well, yeah, we'll get you out to London then." It's so funny. He was so casual about it. But that was really surprising that they just called and asked me, and it wasn't even through an interview process, because they knew my work and they knew that I could do it. So I didn't have to really jump through hoops to get the job, which for such a massive show, I couldn't believe that I was just getting called and asked to come out and shoot. So, and I was a huge fan of the show prior as well. When it first came out and I was watching it, I remember even telling my husband, I was like, "Oh my gosh, that is a show I would love to shoot." So the fact that it came about where I got to shoot it was really exciting.
Oh, you manifested it, right? So.
I guess I manifested it. Yeah.
So would it be fair to say you were more excited about getting to work on the show from a career standpoint as opposed to a fan viewer point?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, even being a fan, of course, that's super fun, but what a huge step forward in my career to shoot a show of that size. It's one of the top shows of Netflix. I know that it's starting to become potentially the top show on Netflix with the viewership of season 3. Um, so I knew that it was going to be a massive step forward for my career. And now that I've shot season 3, after shooting it, I feel like, honestly, I feel like I could shoot anything at this point, because it was just such a big undertaking. And and there's something about having to shoot. I'm just gonna pause 1 second. Can you hear that out? They're doing like yard work. I wasn't expecting this today. Okay.
No, I don't hear a thing.
Okay, just making sure.
Hold
I
on,
didn't
let
know
me let me let
if
me
you
let me
could.
just try again. Give me a second. No, I don't hear a thing.
Okay, great. Yeah, they're dragging like a garbage can around back there. And I told them to them doing podcasts, but no one cares.
All good. No worries.
um, uh, yeah, I mean, there's something about like working on such a big now, obviously, like shooting like a war movie or something like that, where you have all these giant battle scenes, and the coordination of that is a whole other thing.
Hmm.
However, I feel like when you're doing massive coordination of ballroom scenes and you're still having to make everyone look beautiful all the time, there's a whole other level of complication with that. So it was like, okay, I've shot Bridgerton now. I feel like I could maybe do anything at this point in my career. Um, because yeah, it was such a big challenge.
Right. I'll be very honest with you. I never saw season one and two. I just sort of saw the recap. I mean, it wasn't something that I would actually make a point of watching it. And I'm just
I
being
get it. I get it. Usually it's the
I
wives. I always hear from
yeah.
like colleagues are
Oh
like, "Oh,
God.
my wife loves your show."
She and I started watching and I did a recap, like I think YouTube had like a 15-minute recap for each season. So when I started watching it, the first mem thing that it hit me, I was really a huge fan of a film that came out in the 90s, Sense and Sensibility by Ang Lee, with Emma Thompson, Kate
Yeah.
Winslet, and what's his name, Alan Rickman, Hugh Grant,
Yes.
and
Yes.
it reminded me of that. That was my first initial thing
That's
that, oh,
great because I
you know,
actually watched a lot of those movies before going into season three. Sense and Sensibility was one of them. Dangerous Liaisons with John Malkovich. That
right.
was that was actually a big influence for me. But I did go back and watch a lot of those really beautiful period pieces from like the 80s and 90s. Um, I think I even rewatched Secret Garden. I think that's the
Oh,
1980s. It's Roger Deakins. So it's like, yeah, it's forgot what
wasn't
year that
Secret
one was done.
Garden in the night? Secret Garden was in the 90s, no? Or was
Was
there
it
another version
90s? It
of?
might have been 90s.
Yeah, that's
I
a
just
great
remember
movie.
watching it as a little kid, so I can't remember how old I was. But it's the Roger Deakins one. So I know I rewatched that as well. So just trying to wrap my head around naturally lit, non-electricity time period, and what that looks like and what that could look like. And Dangerous Liaisons was actually a big influence just because they did do a lot of hard light sun splashes on the back wall, and I love that look anyway. And I just wanted to make sure that felt appropriate for Bridgerton, and so I would do that. So I would softly light kind of the space and the people, and then I might push a mole beam through a window or something to have some hard splashes on a back wall. Um, Leaning a little bit more into candlelight and the color of candlelight. That was something that actually season one and two didn't really do so much. They actually still kept a lot of the night work more on a white light
Mm,
color. And I found that kind of weird because you'd see the flames being warm in the frame, but then the ambient light was a little bit on the cooler side. And I think it was just an aesthetic that I think the showrunner at the time didn't want to lean into the warm color tone of candlelight because it did affect the color of the costumes. Like if you light everything warm, then the color is different on the costume. So we actually worked with this season, still lighting things warm. And then we would take it in post color and isolate the costumes and pull the color back out, like maybe reduce the warmth on the costume so that color would come back out so we could still have warm lighting. So it was a little bit more of a color grade thing that we had to do.
wow, that's amazing. I mean, I can imagine the amount of work that goes into it, and with especially with grading and
Oh
fixing
yeah.
certain things. It's a lot of work. It's
Oh,
a
so
lot
much
of
work.
work.
And Pankaj he's been on since season one. And I know that before I would even go sit with him in the theater, he would do like four big passes on every single episode, just trying to get it exactly to where, because we had show LUTs too. So like we would try to light it as close as possible.
Mm,
Um, but he would do like four passes before I would even come in and sit with him. And then we'd look at it and then micro tweak other stuff or, push and pull as you do with color grading. So
right. Da Vinci, I guess you guys using, or
he was actually on it wasn't Da Vinci. It was oh man, I'm having a
I know exactly. I think I know which one are you talking about. There's another major one that uh
I'm having such a brain malfunction. What is it called? It's something light, isn't it? Face
yeah,
light.
yes.
Yeah.
I think that's what it is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. So which you mentioned Roger Deakins. I mean, he's amazing, right? One of the most amazing piece of work by Conrad Hall, late Conrad Hall, which I saw after 20 years, Road to Perdition.
Mm.
Uh, Such talented and amazing individuals and craft that they have, like, working with rain and different lights and the camera movement matching with the action and the
Mm.
suspense and all that. Which DP have you sort of grown up wanting to not necessarily be like or be inspired from?
Mm-hmm.
And you still do. Any few
Mm-hmm.
names?
Yeah, Roger Deakins is definitely one of them. And I finally got to meet him in person just last week.
Oh, cool.
I know, it was amazing. And it was one of those situations where it was a smaller dinner. So it was more of an intimate environment. And I've never had the courage to actually go up to him and introduce myself. And this time, because it was such a small group,
Right.
totally felt like, okay, this is the time to talk to him and James. And it was really cool to meet your hero, really. Um, I've always appreciated his work. I think that and he comes from documentary, and he does have that also that naturalistic approach of what feels right in the space. If it's natural lighting, then we just time it during the day where the natural lighting works. Like I love all that stuff. I don't ever feel like his stuff is really lit. Like even when you're watching Blade Runner, it's still motivated. It's still motivated off the LEDs, it's off the cityscape, it's off the orange smoke that you know what I mean? It's still
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
motivated,
I get it.
natural to the environment. Um, so he's definitely one of them. I mean, honestly, Greg Fraser is up
Hmm.
there now with me. I love the work that he's been doing lately, and he writes it a little bit on the lower side. Like Dune has really dark elements to it, and I love that too. That works not as well with Bridgerton, but it does work with other things that I've done. Like I worked on Quantum Leap as well, which we were able to play into the shadows and keep it contrasting and dark. And so I'm inspired by his work too. And he's definitely kind of on the newer front as a big DP. Um, Definitely Conrad Hall. I mean, I got to meet him when I was at AFI, and that was really cool. And I liked that he wasn't terribly technical, which I found really interesting. He said he was like, "Yeah, you don't have to know what the lights are called. You just tell your gaffer you want one this big." That can be there coming this way. It's like you don't have to know if it's an 18K or if it's a whatever. We're like, oh, that's really cool. um, yeah. So, and there's definitely new ones coming out. Like honestly, Mandy Walker, some of the work that she's been doing is really amazing. I loved Elvis. I thought it was
Right.
so good. Just in such a variety of styles in there too. It's all over the place, but it worked with the story.
Yeah. What one of the things that you mentioned, and this has nothing to do with cinematography, well, kind of. You mentioned that how you finally got to meet Roger Deakins, and it was because it was kind of an intimate environment where you felt more comfortable approaching him, as opposed to like, a massive event. And and I can relate to that, and I think a lot of creative people, but I would like to sort of hear it from you. A lot of people in the creative business, not all, but a lot, have this social skills lack, if you want to call it, right? But
Yeah.
when we're actually working, you can put us against the biggest amount of crowds, a completely different person pops out, right? How do you notice that when you're like sort of
I
work?
noticed that about a lot of colleagues and even people that I'm mentoring and stuff. I honestly am a very social person.
Oh, you are. Okay. So that
Yeah, that
doesn't
was just the main reason why I never felt comfortable walking up to him before is he was always mobbed by so many people. Like anytime he was in a crowded environment, he would just have 10 people around him waiting to ask a question. And it just was never the right time to go up and introduce myself.
sure.
Just like, so that it wasn't that, I mean, yes, I was intimidated by him because he's an icon to me, but it was more just like, how am I going to separate myself from all of these people that want to say hi to
Yeah.
him? So, um, but other than that, no, I'm actually pretty good at the social aspect and the networking aspect. And I think I've kind of always been that way. I mean, before I got into cinematography, I thought I was going to be like a news anchor or something. So I was studying communications, and I used to do like speech contests growing up. Like my parents are piano teachers and my sister was in theater, and I mean I grew up on the stage too, dancing, and so it was never a,
Right.
a weird thing to me to have to socialize with people. But I do find that that is hard for a lot of creative types. And I hate that that could potentially be a barrier for them to be able to do the work. But I know that that can be a barrier because the bottom line is, even when we are on set and we're working, it is still absolutely a social atmosphere, and how
Mm,
you're having to collaborate with people and how you're having to communicate with people. And if you don't try to develop at least that skill set, I think that it's hard to get ahead. So even if you do have social anxiety and difficulty with that aspect of it, I feel like you can train that in yourself
yep.
and at least put on
Yeah.
a little bit of a mask at that when you have to do that. So and then you go home and you rest and you hang out with your cats. And I have cats, so I can make fun.
It it's actually it's interesting you mentioned that because I think the fight is within. Because and I can speak for myself in this. Um, there was probably a time, when I say a time, it wasn't a long time ago, but let's say 12 years ago. Like for me to sort of, because I hadn't made a film at that point. I'd done a lot of other stuff, like a lot of commercials, a lot of events-based stuff, but film is a completely different thing.
Mhm,
And making documentaries and stuff, being in that really, in the thickest of the situations and trying to cope with that. But
mhm.
one thing is that what I learned is that until you push yourself to the corner of the cliff, it's not gonna happen. So as much as I probably did not enjoy, and I won't lie, I rather be in my own space than be in a room of 300 people. But if I have to be there for the sake of what I'm working on, or
Mhm.
even not necessarily in that moment, but just, for networking purposes, I
Mhm.
will push myself, and it does wonders. It does. You have
Mhm.
to make an effort yourself, but it's
Yeah,
hard at the same time.
yeah.
It's
It's hard. I feel like you can find that balance. Like you don't have to
yeah.
be out socializing all the time, but you do have to do it once in a while.
You do,
Uh,
you do.
yeah.
There's
And
so
that's
much
how you
out
meet
there now.
people. You
Yeah.
meet people at
Yeah.
networking events and camera lens demos, and like that's how you meet people. So
I
it's
I'll
important.
tell you I'll tell you a little story about how important it is to running into people. I ran into somebody at a wedding, someone who was he wasn't, and he had nothing to do with the film world. He was a businessman, but he loved the idea of storytelling and making movies and stuff. And someone introduced me to him, and he goes to me, "No, one day we'll work on something." This was in 2015, and he knew people, he had resources and stuff and networks. And then 4 years later, or 3.5 years later, I was at an event in the UK. I was already working on a film. We were already directing a film. This one right here, Citizen of Moria.
Oh, cool. Okay,
And
cool.
and my hands were full, and I had been introduced to this. I saw this woman speaking about an issue in China about the Uyghurs, and I'm not sure if you've heard of them, which is this film, In Search of My Sister. And he saw me at this event, which I've never been to, and he remembered me from 3.5 years ago, and he pulled me on the side and he introduced me to the protagonist. He's like, "I want you to meet this woman, and I think you should work together." And that was it. Like that taught me so much, that how someone I met 3.5, 4 years ago and never communicated, never even thought about, somehow,
Yeah.
because I said hello to him.
Yeah.
And that's how you have to think. You can't expect for the results to come in a snap. Sometimes it will
No.
take 5, 10 years.
Yes, absolutely. No, it's true. Actually, not on a social side, but that's how I got my break, was because of a connection that I had made like 2 years prior. So, and it was
Do,
just because I had day played on a show, just one day for Christian Sabalt. And 2 years later, for the people, the Shondaland show was looking for a C camera operator and also slash DP that could bump up sometimes when Christian was busy. And so my name was referred to him, and he remembered me from that one day that I worked with him. And he was like, "Oh my gosh, yeah, absolutely. Let's get her in for the interview for sure, because she did a great job for me that one day." So that's how I got in. was
Isn't that
because
amazing? Like you worked one day and he remembered you. Obviously, you must have done great stuff, which he said
it
you did.
well,
You-
it was a special situation because it was like a concert scene that he was shooting for a Disney show. And it looked, the amount of shots that they were having to get that day, it was a night shoot, all nighter. Like it was just, it was a lot. And as I was camera operating, just like the D camera or whatever, um, I noticed that it just seemed like there was just a lot of content that needed to get done. And I was a little bold and I actually went up to Christian and was like, just so you know, I've been a DP for about 14 years and I'm a graduate from AFI. I do know how to shoot. So if you need help at all with like presetting some lighting or whatever, like let me know because I might be able to help you out. And
Mm.
yeah, so he was like, oh, that's interesting. Okay, good to know. And then as the night went on, he was like, hey, actually, can you help set up this shot? I got to get this exterior shot, and you could take some electricians out there and light it up, da 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 da, whatever. And so I was like, yeah, absolutely. So I'd start pre-lighting some of the shots, and then he'd come out, check the frame, check the lighting, and he's like, okay, this is great, shoot it, let's roll. And so I hopscotched a little bit with him that evening, and that's what he remembered was that I actually helped him make his day. So that was not just me camera operating. I actually stepped up a little bit to help him out on the lighting side.
Well, it's about taking initiative, right? And if you hadn't done that, then
Yeah.
who knows,
And I
right?
wouldn't do that all the time. It's like you gotta
Yeah,
see
yeah.
what's going on. Like I wouldn't a
Step on
normal
other
office
people's
operator
toes.
wouldn't go
Yeah,
to the DP and be like, oh, I can help you shoot. Like there's
yeah,
no way I would.
yeah. I get it.
Yeah, yeah. But in this situation, I was like, oh, this I could see because I saw him kind of running out pre-light. Like I saw him kind of having to run around and wear many hats. And I was just like, oh, I probably could help out with that.
That's so
So
cool. That is so
yeah.
cool to know. People, we need to take initiative, and that's all about it is. We always expecting the things to happen to us or for us, but they won't until we take the first step.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
just to kind of wrap things up, Alicia, uh, now that Bridgerton is out, right, and people that you know, or I'm sure online you've seen or reviews, how does it feel like to be in a space where people are talking about like a lot of people, not just like one of those series which a certain genre fans watch, but a lot of people are watching and they come up to you and praise you or what does it feel like? I know the answer, but I just want to hear it from you.
Um, it's it's wild just because you put so many years of practice and work into your craft. And after I've been shooting for over 20 years at this point, and you never know if you're going to get to shoot something like this in your lifetime ever. And so when you do get something like this and it's actually coming out and people are responding well to it, there's really nothing like it. Um, this is going to be hard to top. Let's just say that. It's going to be really hard to top.
But I think the idea shouldn't be that you want to top it. The idea should be that you should just go with it. I know it's hard to
Yeah,
think that big.
I have to. I have to just go with it at this point. Because there's never going to be a feeling like this again. I mean, the first time that you get these kind of responses to your work,
Yes,
that's
nothing can
that's
replace that.
once in a lifetime. So
Yeah.
it'll be different as we go ahead. But yeah, this is the only time that I'm really going to feel this way about it and just over the moon about what we were able to accomplish and I'm just so happy with the way it all turned out too. Um like I love every frame of it. So
No,
very
you
happy.
should because it looks beautiful. It absolutely does. And when you do other projects, you will find something special in terms of people's reaction in a different way that you won't find with this, and so on and so forth, right? So
Yeah.
that's journey. Any exciting stuff coming up for you, or you're taking a break and considering
Taking a
project?
break right now, gonna do some camping. I am going back to season 4 of Bridgerton, so that's probably my next big project. Other than that, yeah, just visiting family and just taking a minute for myself. So
Awesome. Well, that's great. Would love to chat with you when season 4 comes out. And maybe even in between, if there's something, I'll go through your IMDb a little bit more in depth. I haven't,
yeah.
to be honest. And if there's
Yeah,
something
I
that
mean,
is of,
I'm hoping to get something in between now and when I have to go back. It's just getting a little tight on the schedule at this point. Um, but yeah, no, I would love to chat with you again. This is great.
awesome. Thank you so much for your time and thank you for your wonderful work. And looking forward to chatting with you more in future.
Thank you so much. All right.
Okay. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.